Hello and welcome back to my channel. I am Marie Murataya, a preschool speech language pathologist, and I wanted to take a little bit of time to share with you how I collect data, especially for the unique program that I'm a part of. I work in a full inclusion preschool program, which is really cool because I get to operate my program as far as speech and language goes in more of a co-teaching model. I get to push into classrooms, run center times, take a portion and lead a circle time activity with whole group learning, and also support my students that are on my caseload and their individualized needs. Taking data has never been something that I've been super excited to do. But I know it's essential to monitor my students' progress, to be able to analyze, what goals we can start working on and where they're at. But I am so devoted to promoting the connection I make with my students over the data collection. Before I did more of a push-in style session, I was also pulling out, and I still do pull out sessions where I'm in my speech room working with my students. But how effective is it really if I am sitting here focused on the data binder and making sure I check off what my student's doing with my face looking down than if I'm being present with them? I feel like when we're doing that, we can take away from the connection we're building. I know sometimes with an articulation phonology session, it might be easier to do because you are listening for those trials. But even then, sometimes it can take away from the session. You just have to be mindful or make sure you build moments in for your students to maybe be playing. And so when they're maybe sitting there rolling out the Play-Doh, you're quickly jotting down what just happened or the artic sounds that you heard or the trials that you got. But overall, I will say I have done away with needing to have data out during every single session or interaction with my students. And here's how I've done that. Enter the data binder. Now, I work at 3 different school sites. I'm in a different classroom every day of the week. So each of my school sites is equipped with one of my data binders, organized in such a fashion that I have everything I need for my students aside from their full IEP. So I have tabs for every student, and within each student's tab is first and foremost their attendance calendar. On here, I mark what kind of a session they had. So if they were seen by me for a push-in session, I mark that here. If they were seen by me for an individualized pull-out session, I mark that here. If they were absent, if I was absent, if I was at a conference, everything pertaining to what service they got is here. So when I go back and do my billing, I can make sure it matches up with this. The next thing in their section of the data binder is their IEP at a glance. Now, obviously I can't show you one of those. There's confidential information, but the IEP at a glance is that summary of the IEP that contains their goals, it contains their services, it contains case manager, and just that information that's necessary to know exactly what your student is working on. I go through and highlight which goals I'm working on, or if I'm collaborating on any of the goals, I highlight those as well. And then after that is their data. Now, I am going to put a picture of what my data sheet looks like, and I'll explain it while that picture is up. So on my data sheet, you can see that there's a section to put down all that information you need on like a SOAP note, describing what number session you're on, what time you saw them, what your plan was, who saw them. If you have a SLPA, make sure your SLPA is putting their initials or signing for that session under your license. And of course, you have the date that you're seeing them. There's an area for goals. Now, on these data sheets, which I have linked below, you can get these at my website, thanksmorris.com. You have the opportunity to either type in what goals you're working on for the year. You can do it for every progress monitoring level. So maybe, if you're getting 6 out of 10 trials by February, you have that in there, and then you change it as those progress periods end and begin. I like to do it for the year because I know the overall goal, and then I'll make notes of like what levels of support my students needed, and I can always refer back to their broken down goal list on their IEP when I need a refresher of like where exactly should we be right now. There is a spot on there if you're doing trials for said trials on your data. So there's 10 boxes. Usually we're looking at either 4 out of 5 trials or 8 out of 10 trials. And I did 10 total just so that way those of us that maybe like to write that in, or depending on the goal you're working on, if it's more appropriate to have that, you can put those there. But then there's a space for the notes, which is really what I'm looking at as the SLP, because I go back and access these data sheets after the day is done. Or I have a morning session with the kids, I come back to my speech room or wherever my binder is, put down the data for that, or if I have little chunks in between the days. I know in a recent blog, I was laughing at it as I went back and edited because it was just essentially what I do all the time. Like there was a quick gap in the schedule or I had a student absent, so I was writing my data from the previous 3 students in that chunk of time. I find that when I am so present with my students, it's not hard to recollect what happened. I might forget a specific vocabulary word they said here and there, but for the most part, I do feel like when they're showing me skills, I try and out loud repeat it and say, "Oh my gosh, I love that you said bird." So that way I go back and I'm like remembering what happened in that session. But the more present I am, the more I can recollect and think about how it went. I can kind of in the moment be analyzing, task adjusting, and then I can write down, this worked really well. Using the core board during this activity was really essential. And that's really the data that I'm looking at, is because in that information is the level of support. It's all kind of woven in my narrative. And so I do sometimes, am mindful about making sure I say needed minimal, moderate, or maximum support, but we know what that looks like. And so when I'm in the session, I know how it feels to be giving, more or less support. And so I come back and I write it after. That's my method. That's what works for me. Now, some hacks. If you don't want to, carry around a clipboard with your data binder, but you need to write things down, bring Post-it notes or bring a little notepad and you can just write down, if you have a notepad and you just put Johnny, Sarah, whatever. And then when you're with Johnny in the classroom or during that moment, you can just quickly write things down if you're like, I need to remember this. Great, but have strategies that don't take away from the interaction with your student. If you feel yourself like, if I write this down, it's gonna break what's happening here, don't break what's happening here. Just always make that your goal, and your data is going to reflect what happened in that session because you were locked in and present with your students and being mindful about the time that you're spending with them. That's really it. That's what I do. And then the really nice thing about having it in the data binder is that when it does come time to write progress, I have it all ready to go. I don't have to flip through students' individual files to find their data. I bring this over to my desk. I sit here, and when I'm writing her progress, I sit here and I look through her data. Then I flip and I go to the next students. Sorry, I just shook the camera. But do you see what I'm saying? It's a for even the most unorganized of SLPs, this is so easy, effective, and it's the most organized thing in my speech room. I will absolutely 100% tell you that this is the way to go if you need a time-saving, life-saving SLP hack. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the comments. I'd be happy to do more videos on more specifics, or if you have specific goals, you're like, how do I write data on this goal if I'm doing it this way? Please just let me know. Maybe we can workshop it. I can come up with some ideas in another video, but ultimately, this thing has not steered me wrong. You can find my worksheets again, thanksmorris.com. They are linked below. I appreciate that so much. And I appreciate you being here, supporting the channel. So please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and share if this video is helpful for you and you know an SLP that would really benefit from maybe getting this as an idea. Feel free to share. All right, thank you so much, and I will see you in a video very soon.